Welcome back to the Menopause Coach Podcast. With me, your host as always, Adele Johnston, the Menopause Coach and your educator for the next 20 to 30 minutes. This is a really heartfelt episode today. Imagine a world where menopause was celebrated, and I'm going to share a story with you that's really relevant in this situation. As always, I know we have to cover this with you. It's the boring part of the podcast, but disclaimer. This is not meant to replace any medical advice, so please do make sure that you consult your own medical teams, doctors, specialists. If there's anything that comes up for you, I am not here to replace that information for you. I'm here to bring you some information, some education, and to support you with your own autonomy and empowerment of care. But please always seek medical advice if you have concerns. So imagining a world where menopause wasn't something that women feared, but instead a world where our girls were growing up hearing about perimenopause and hearing about it in the same way that they are taught about puberty, about breast development, about periods and menstrual cycles, about all of the things of our bodies changing. And I still remember to this day being inside our assembly hall and being taught all about tampons and sanitary towels and period products. And it was like, wow, okay, And at the time, it's like, why are they doing this? This is embarrassing. But actually, had they then maybe went a step further and actually started to talk about the lifestyle of change that we have, and about how when we are young women and we're changing in our bodies, this is what we could expect to happen. We wouldn't be coming into this phase of our life as women, as adult women, thinking, what is even happening? So imagine that, right? Not hidden away, not whispered about, not misunderstood. And imagine a world where menopause wasn't viewed as the beginning of something that was negative. Like, we hear about the words decline and, lowering of, and it just all feels so less than, doesn't it? But actually imagine this was, and this is such a big word for me, I've got it on my necklace, my values around my neck, freedom. Imagine it was freedom. When someone asked me recently about my own menopausal journey and how I would explain it all, I was like, wow, like, how long do you have? But actually, one of the biggest things I'd said in that conversation was, it's actually being very freeing for me. It's created that sense of freedom. And that really surprised when I shared that. They were like, really? Why? So imagine it actually was the beginning of freedom. Imagine that we celebrated menopause, and this wasn't just something that we're like made to fear or made to mourn the changes, but actually celebrate that actually we've got the next chapter of our being and self coming. Yeah. Anyway, this is just the world my brain sits in. I'm like, imagine it was different. Imagine it was more. Imagine it was bigger. Imagine it was better. Because I truly believe that this is the world that we should be living in. And I don't understand how we've got to this point and we're still not here. It's wild to me. This isn't something new. This isn't a new concept or part within women's lives. Yeah, these changes have been happening for centuries. So it's nothing new. But we get to change that now. And I'm not saying that this episode will do that. But what I am saying is that we have inherited a narrative that tells women we actually have inherited this, that tells us to dread menopause, fear it. Yeah, I hear it all the time now that young women are fearful of perimenopause, fearful of menopause, of what it means for them, instead of us having to brace. Yeah, and it's like, oh my God, is this happening to me? And suffer, expect suffering and suffer through it. Expect the loss of confidence, expect the weight gain, expect the sleep disturbances, expecting lowered energy, expecting feeling less happy in life. I don't want to accept that. And I feel that almost we've inherited this, well, this is how you should feel. So of course you're going to feel it. It's the psychology, right? It's like if we tell ourselves we feel pain, we feel pain. We tell ourselves it's all fine. It's normally all fine within reason. But what if we did things differently, right? Imagine if menopause had been researched properly researched centuries ago, with the same urgency that we have in other conditions that are out there that affect us, that affect men. I mean, we talk about the whole divide between erectile dysfunction just being like a click of the fingers, and men have a solution they don't even need to really see their doctor for. But women, if we have changes in our vaginal pH, changes to the vaginal lubrication, changes to our vaginal muscular function, it becomes so problematic for us to even get the initial frontline help. We can't just show up and get over the counter. We do have some further solutions and vaginal estrogen products that are available to purchase over the counter. But let me tell you something, I couldn't walk in there and purchase Gina. Okay, I couldn't, because I don't meet the standards of the over the counter prescribing for that. I don't. Mad, right? But I'm a woman with a vagina that is having vaginal changes. I have to get it prescribed through my GP, so I have to see the GP. I can't just put it on repeat prescription at times because they query and question everything. Now, it's not that that's a bad thing, okay? There's this divide, isn't there? And the nuances of health and care, of course. However, bringing ourselves back into this, imagine if women weren't waiting years for answers for things like endometriosis, PMOS, changes within our bodies that we know are not right for us. Imagine if the healthcare worldwide, I'm not just talking about in Scotland or the UK, but imagine if healthcare professionals worldwide were trained to recognize the earliest signs of changes in women's bodies, that when we show up, knowing that something is different for our bodies, that the healthcare professionals are at least trained to be like, yeah, this sounds quite familiar of potentially perimenopause. Because one of the things that perimenopause is not measured or defined against is your age. It can happen at any age and stage of life. Imagine if we knew that vaginal dryness, bladder symptoms like recurring UTIs. There's women that I know that will get recurring diagnosis of having consistent and recurring thrush. And yet it's not, right? It's not. They're given the treatment and it's not thrush. It's not that bacteria. It's vaginal changes caused by lowering estradiol, lowering progesterones. I think what we are facing here is just this whole gap. It's like a grey area or a black hole of information that unfortunately we're not then given the right duty of care when these symptoms start to show up. Even things like painful sex, bleeding during and after sex. I was sent down a really invasive cancer pathway when I approached my GP with these symptoms. It was what we call genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or previously known as vaginal atrophy. Changes, shrinking, all of these things that start to happen. Dryness and soreness and swelling. And actually, I remember feeling quite embarrassed about it because I just thought it was me. I didn't know that this actually happened quite commonly. Right? Hormonal changes, of course, affect your vagina. They affect the vaginal pH. They affect the vaginal cavities and walls and muscles and cells. It's part of you. It's an organ. Your whole system, your uterus is an organ. It's part of your body. So, of course, when we start to have those changes, that too is affected. Not immune from it. So imagine asking for vaginal estrogen and it being as straightforward as buying like hay fever tablets. Yeah, antihistamines. Literally. Imagine if women didn't have to justify and hustle and haggle and beg for the support that we actually really deserve and should be available. Yeah. Imagine we didn't have to convince someone else that we were struggling enough that we needed the help. Imagine if we treated menopause the same way that we treat a fractured bone. I have a story about that I'm going to share with you in a minute. Because no one tells you to just get on with it if you show up with a broken foot. Yeah? You are given care. No one suggests you're just like, read this book and it will be fine. Or think positively and everything will change. get more sleep, you'll feel great. Right? No one questions whether you really need support if you show up with a fractured or broken bone. They assess you. They do an investigation. They diagnose what's happening. Yeah, you've normally got an x-ray in there as part of that investigation and that diagnosis, so they know what they're working with. And then they put together this recovery protocol for you. They know how long it will take for that to heal typically, and you've got some aftercare. Yeah, the fracture clinic, whether that's in person or a virtual fracture clinic, will then be in touch and you'll get some ongoing care. Yeah, but pain relief, some comfort, whether that be through a plaster cast or a compression bandage or a walking boot. Anyway, I digress. It's not the same for menopause, and yet menopause will happen in some form, whether that be through natural progression, whether that be through surgical intervention, medical interventions, to every female, born female at birth. So what the hell is happening, right? And we can recircle around all of this. I'm not here to pick out the problems, but what if it wasn't a problem that we faced? What if menopause itself wasn't the problem? What if it's actually about lack of preparation, lack of education, lack of research, lack of support that we have not got? And knowing that around 25% of women right now will experience such severe menopausal symptoms that it affects their day-to-day life, their relationships, their careers. They cannot just pretend and do some deep breathing and positive thinking to get through it, right? They endure this so quietly because they know that there's not going to be any support out there for them. So they start leaving jobs, they start leaving relationships, getting divorces, losing friendships, losing connections, stepping away from themselves. And this has been happening for decades, centuries, for women, questioning our own sanity on whether it's something that we have done. Bloody hell, right? Believing that we are the ones that are broken along the journey, believing that potentially we're just not strong enough to deal with these things when the anxiety takes over and we can't get out of bed. Wild, honestly. We have not failed. I am telling you that right now. Now back into this imagining bigger. Imagining if our children, and as girls, as young girls, we were raised not to sit quietly in the corner and look pretty and behave and be praised for that good girl attitude and mentality, for putting everyone first, for pleasing. What if we didn't just please and serve others and survive through it? But we grew up with a voice. We grew up knowing that boundaries are healthy. Yeah, I didn't figure that out until I was in my 40th year, really. Maybe a little bit earlier, 39. What if we didn't grow up to think that boundaries were selfish, that self-connection, self-love and self-care was selfish? What if we didn't think that taking up space was rude? We hear this all the time, right? Because something fascinating happens during perimenopause. It has for me personally, and it has for lots of women that I speak to, but all of the clients that I work with. Our estrogen and estradiol in particularly, as it starts to drop during our perimenopause transition into menopause, many of us start to notice something changing. We start to notice that we become a little bit less tolerant. There's a reason for that. Not for life, but and not even for the connection or relationships. We become less tolerant of bullshit. We become less tolerant of just showing up and people pleasing, of saying yes when we want to say no, or no when we want to say yes, of putting up with really poor behaviors around us. Our boundaries start to become way more stronger, right? We don't put up with everyone else's needs ahead of our own. And yet that can feel very different for family dynamics when potentially we've done that all of our lives. We don't tolerate that anymore. So this starts to be a bit of a dramatic change, right? But when our estrogen is declining, that can really influence our mood regulation, our emotional processing, our stress resilience, and we might face we might face things a bit more less buffered, right? So things can be said when we're oh yeah, I used my external voice when I probably used my internal voice, or should I have? right? Where we've pleased before, but now we're being actively vocal. We're sharing. Yeah, we become more direct. I used to get told a lot of the time that I was very abrupt. But now I'm like, is it abrupt or is it direct? If I was a male and I'd said that, would I be told that I was being abrupt, or would I just be told I was being direct and more honest, less willing to put up with the BS? Yeah. And make people feel less comfortable. That can happen over time. So, what we can find in menopause is that as we start to transition into this phase, yeah, and stage more so of our life and our journey, we can become less tolerant, right? And I love that. I love that for me. I love that for you, because actually, perhaps what we are then witnessing here is that women are finally becoming themselves. I know I did. The whole part around my menopause being very early, when I was 35, starting my HRT at 37, I recognized that actually I became more free. And not a lot of people around me enjoyed that. And I did lose relationships because of it, connections with family members where I wasn't willing to just, right, to just sacrifice, to just put up, to just endure. I became a bit more vocal about what I wanted and what I didn't want. And I celebrate that for me. They didn't like that for them. But that's okay, right? Send love, love and release. So, what we're maybe calling a symptom, what if it's actually wisdom? What if this is part of our journey because menopause is gifting us the opportunity to strip away everything that never was ours to carry, that never was ours to say, I'll say yes to that when I really deeply don't want to do it anymore. It's like be in our truth. And that is what menopause gifted me. Now, I want to share a story with you about something that I've experienced. And I gave you the analogy of what if we treated our menopausal symptoms the way that we treat, or when we show up for help, the way that we treat a broken bone. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was out in Edinburgh with Sean and the girls, and we'd planned a family day. I wore a really beautiful pair of leather slip-on sandals, and we went for our day out in Edinburgh. It was lovely. The weather was gloriously sunny. It was warm. I had a really beautiful dress on, and I felt amazing. We even got Clara a new skateboard that day, right? It was like one of those days where it was like, this is really fun. Now, we'd walked around most of the day. It's a city, right? So, of course, it's a bit cobbly streets. And what I recognized was when we got back to the car, I had a little bit of discomfort in my right foot. And I thought, oh, has it maybe been walking on the cobbled streets? Have I maybe twisted it slightly and not recognized? It was nothing dramatic, right? Just enough to notice it was a little bit tender. But over the following few days, it became a bit harder for me to walk properly. We headed off on a really special family trip. It started in London. We had the My Chemical Romance concert, it's Clara's favourite band. And then we flew out to New York to see Ariana Grande, that's Shannon's favourite artist. So we've had a really amazing July. It was super fun. What I recognised, however, was walking around London, I knew something wasn't right. Yeah, by the time we arrived in New York, I ended up having to go and buy a walking boot. And let me tell you, walking 20,000 steps a day around Manhattan with a sore foot is not my idea of ideal. Yeah, not the ideal that I had imagined. The boot, however, absolutely saved the trip, and it allowed us to get out and do. We were in a heat wave. Oh my gosh, for any of you that are in and around the New York area, it was a massive heat wave. And we are talking like degrees Celsius. For those of you in the UK, it was like 37 to 40 degrees, which is just wild for this Scottish skin. But I think for you guys over in the US, it was way, way over like 120 Fahrenheit, I believe, maybe even more than that. I'd need to do my calculations. But it was hot. It was really bloody hot. So walking around in that moon boot was just incredibly difficult, but it allowed me to function. So I was thankful. By the time we were leaving JFK Airport, I couldn't do anymore. My foot was so done that I needed wheelchair assistance to get across the airport because we were checking in at one side and we were flying out of the other. So they wheelchaired me, which honestly, I hated every second of it Not because, I mean, the staff were incredible, so kind, so compassionate, so wonderful at what they do. Very deeply grateful for it because I couldn't have walked it. But I was so frustrated. I was so angry and I was livid in my entire bones. I was livid. I felt really angry because I wanted to be able to walk. I'm a very independent woman. I wanted that independence back. It made me feel very vulnerable and fragile. And it just reminded me how quickly we can take our health for granted, our mobility for granted, until it's taken away or compromised. And mobility and health's around this necklace as well as one of my core values. Mobility is something that we rarely appreciate until we have it compromised. And taking away your ability to walk freely for distance as well is not something that I take lightly, right? It really did affect my happiness. I got home and I phoned NHS 24 and I went for a checkup. They booked me into the minor injuries clinic. I got an x-ray and there it was. A small fracture in my metatarsal, one of the metatarsal bones in my foot. And apparently it's not uncommon in women. Slightly flat feet. It wasn't ideal that I was in sandals all day, but this is not a story of like, wow, this is what I did to break my foot or fracture my foot. I literally wore a pair of beautiful sandals with a really gorgeous dress, had a really fun day with family, and fractured my foot. At 42 years old, here I am recording you this episode, wearing a compression bandage and a moon boot to get around. I can't go for my usual steps for health. It's killing me, really. I love to train, as you know, if you follow me. I love to train and I weight train at least twice per week. I've had to adapt that. I can't put weight bearing on it. And we're talking about around a 6-week period, which is not ideal. However, the point to the story is this. I sat back and asked myself, if this was one of my menopausal coaching clients, what would I be doing with her right now in a protocol? So instead of sitting inside that frustration, that anger, that upset, that kind of like pity party, right? That whole wallow zone, I flipped the reframe and said, right, Adele, this is a client of yours. How are you supporting her? What's the protocol? What are you writing? And I got to work, right? I looked at this rather than keep pushing through. Absolutely not. I reminded myself that healing requires rest. I'm not a good rester. I will admit that. I love to do my self-cares, however. So what I recognized with myself was, if I tell myself I've got to rest this foot, I will get even more angry and even more frustrated. I know most of you will listen to this and resonate. So instead, I've booked myself in, as part of my recovery protocol, some self-care slots in my diary. And those self-care slots are designed around things like, can I go ground on the grass and just relax? Can I go sit in the living room on our reclining sofa, put my foot up and read a chapter of my book? Can I take the laptop and work from the sofa so I can elevate the foot? All of these things, resting with intention and not with guilt, has been a huge, gentle reminder for me. In sharing all of this, there's a huge protocol I've written for myself that involves things like supplementation, grounding, breath work, more protein in my diet, increasing that to support my healing. Because I can't now get out and do my steps for health, I've looked at other ways of the mobility that I can do, right? It's like we don't just have to sit on our butts and do nothing, but actually resting gets to be done purposefully. It gets to be done with self-cares in mind and massively protecting my healing journey. Otherwise, I'm going to make it worse, right? And it's not going to get any better. So I share this with you because if, like me, you are a very focused and ambitious woman, right now we're building an entirely new arm to the business, and I cannot wait to share with you what we're doing. We've also just evolved my Business Women's Collective, where I mentor women's health and menopause coaches to build their own successful, impactful businesses in the space. It's exciting, it's busy, it's massively energizing for me. And the truth is, I'm not someone that just wants to sit still when I'm really excited about work like that. So instead of pretending that I'll suddenly just, take some rest, I've worked it into my diary as part of my protocol. And that has been a massive game changer. So if you are someone like me who is less likely to take those rest periods, then have a word with yourself and look at what is your protocol reframe. Yeah. After I record this episode, I am going to take my next meeting outside on my egg chair in the garden because the sun is shining. That is also going to be partial rest for me because I would normally take most of my team meetings standing, right? I raise my desk, it's got a button, and I stand and I do my meetings. This is super important for us to simply be. That is self-love. It is not always about the bubble baths and the spa days. It's about listening to what your body needs and responding with love and kindness. And your future you will thank you for this. I promise you. So maybe in this moment, as we wrap this episode, maybe menopause is the first time in our lives that our bodies refuse to let us ignore ourselves any longer. Maybe, and purposely, this injured foot is part of my Adele, just slow down purposefully, right? Everything happens to us and for us for a reason. I am a massive believer in that. Maybe I need to readjust boundaries. Who knows what this is for? But putting ourselves first is not selfish. It is required. Yeah, this is when we finally get that freedom of connection to self. And this is hugely important for you and your body. From one woman to another, I just invite you to really sit with today what I've shared. What if, right? Imagine a difference. Imagine a different narrative where actually we sit back and say, we're not about to just allow this to become a really heavy, dark cloud in our lives, but actually menopause gets to be this exchange of, I no longer will settle. My boundaries are in place. This is what I want for me. It's not the end of something beautiful. It's the beginning of something magical. I genuinely believe this. I'm living with it, through it. Don't know what's ahead with it, but we can change the story for ourselves and for each other in our sisterhood, in our circle of women, right? And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, like I really like the idea of this change, then thinking about this from what is the reframe for you? Nothing's broken. My foot is right now, but nothing is broken within us when we start to navigate the changes. We're simply being asked to pay attention to what we now need, to look at the version of yourself that maybe no longer exists and can't exist anymore, and to be able to bring your new version of you forward. One conversation at a time, one story at a time, right? And if this has resonated with you, as always, just one small ask, okay? If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, please make sure you are. It helps us grow. We reach more listeners, right? More women that we get to share this with, more lives can be changed. But one ask, please share this episode. If you can, just one request, share it. Share it with your sister. Share it with your best friend. Share it with a colleague. Share it with your mum. Share it with your daughter. Share it with another woman in your life. Share it because the more women that we approach listening to these episodes, hearing a different narrative, a different side of a story about menopause, the closer we can become to creating that world that we get to just sit in, close our eyes, and imagine happening. It gets to become reality. If we can think it, we can make it happen. A world where menopause is not feared but becomes our freedom. It's understood, supported, and perhaps one day even celebrated. Imagine that. I love being here with you, and I would love to hear what you make of this episode. So please come find me, whether that's on social media. You can find me at the.menopause coach on Instagram. I'm across all social media platforms. Come message me, share with me what comes up from this. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, then hey, I've enjoyed being here with you, whether you've listened or watched. Please do go share this, and I will see you again next week with a brand new episode of the Menopause Coach Podcast. You've been here with me, Adele Johnston, the Menopause Coach. See you soon.